Okay, welcome everyone to the Wheeler Centre for this special event. We are discussing the book Growing Up Disabled in Australia as part of our podcast, Pill Pop. So this is a live recorded podcast event. To start off, we'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to any First Nations people who are here with us today. And we'd also like to thank our Auslan interpreters, Amber and Linda, for being here tonight for the live audience. Okay, so first of all, we thought we'd talk about the Pill Pop podcast and what we do. So we've been doing a whole season with the Wheeler Centre that just wrapped up about a year ago.
End of last year was the last episode we recorded. We do not know if we're going to do more episodes because we just don't know how our year's going to go.
Yes, but we'd like to. So the podcast is about chronic illness. We're two people who live with chronic illness, and we wanted to make a podcast that interviews other people like us and talks about the experiences in just a very honest way. So, yeah, we use a lot of humour, but there's also, a lot of sad moments and just like honest life experiences. And it's sort of like a roadmap to living life with chronic illness, from diagnosis to acceptance. And of course that intersects with disability community stuff as well, which I think is why we're here tonight.
We sort of structured the show as a kind of a road trip. The two of us driving around the country in our bent up old ambulance Armstrong. Yeah. I was very proud of that pun. So it's every episode will have like a bit that's just us, and we'll interview people on a theme. So one episode will be about diagnosis, one episode will be about media representation. And of course, something important to note is that the episode is every episode of our podcast is an advice-free zone.
Yeah,
that's for two reasons. Number one, we're not doctors. We are not qualified to give medical advice either in person or via a podcast. Yeah. And the other is that we don't want advice.
Yeah, unsolicited medical advice is really annoying.
Yeah, like you tell someone you're living with a chronic illness, and you can see in their eyes they have this, I can save the day, and they tell you about, I don't know, some diet.
I'm going to tell you how to get well.
And it's like, no, thank you.
So we're delighted to have three guests with us for the first time. Delighted and intimidated and overjoyed, all of the things. So perhaps you can introduce yourselves. We'll start with Jane.
Hi everybody, my name's Auntie Jane and my tribe's Yorta Yorta, and my story is in the book on growing up disabled in Australia. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carly Findlay and I am the editor of Growing Up Disabled in Australia. Is that it?
That's fine.
I'm Lucy and my story is also in Growing Up Disabled in Australia.
Wonderful. And how did you three meet? Have you met before?
I knew Jane before I started editing Growing Up Disabled, but I did not know Lucy until I read her amazing piece. Lucy wrote a piece on being blind and having albinism. Is that okay to describe it like that? And so we met because we did an event in real life in Geelong, the first event, which happened, and then the next event didn't happen because of lockdown. But I'd known Jane for probably, 5 years?
Yeah, about 5 years, yes.
And
definitely.
we did an event last year, the Emerging Writers together.
Yeah, it was awesome, it was. It was really great.
I got to go to Jane's house.
Yes.
So Jane was the only person's house that I went to between March and November.
Yep. And we even done the one in Ross House. Do you remember that?
Yep, that's when I interviewed you for the book.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So I interviewed Jane for the book, and other contributors. Most other contributors wrote their piece or illustrated their piece, and Jane and I sat down and we had an interview in Ross House.
It was awesome. I loved it.
Great. I'm glad it was a good
I'm really happy
experience
about
for you.
Yeah.
It is such a wonderful spectrum of experiences. I think it, maybe not necessarily covers every aspect of disability and chronic illness, but it certainly, hits a lot of those points. So it's a really interesting read, also a really heartbreaking read, a really funny read, because everyone's stories are different. Carly, what prompted you to have this book made now?
So in 2018, I got an invite from Maxine Beneba Clark to write for Growing Up African in Australia, which is part of the Black Ink Growing Up series. And immediately when that happened, when Maxine sent me an email, I texted my agent, Jacinta, who's here today, and I said, I just got invited to write for Growing Up African. Can we also pitch Growing Up Disabled at the same time? Because every time a new Growing Up book was announced, people on Twitter would say, we need a Growing Up Disabled book. And so Jacinta said, yep, no worries, we'll pitch. So I wrote a little pitch, which was a lot smaller than my first book, actually. It was easier to write because I think we could draw on the demand of the book, or for the book, and also, I suggested a whole heap of contributors for the book as well. And so publishing's a very long process, and we had a meeting about it, and then we signed off on it, and then we couldn't announce it until about December the 3rd, which is Disability Day. So we waited about 5 months to announce that we had the book out. Ben Law, who is the editor of Growing Up Queer in Australia, I told him and I told Maxine that I'd got the book deal. But Ben tweeted like at midnight on a Friday, oh yeah, Carly's doing Growing Up Disabled. And I had to message him going, Ben, take that tweet down. And he said, oh, sorry, embargo schmargo. And then, and we put out a call for the contributors for about 6 months, from December to May. And then it was due to be out last year in February. In June, sorry. Yep. And then COVID happened. But the best thing that we could give our writers and also our audience was to hold it off until this year, when we can have in real life events.
Yes, and here we are.
Which is all good, and we're all back to not normal, but there's a lot of people that are back from in Melbourne and, seeing each other again.
Absolutely.
We're almost there.
However, 2 of my book events have been cancelled, so that's pretty hard. But we have had a lot of events, so it's been great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
good.
deadly.
Yeah.
How did it compare to writing your first book, Say Hello?
Much better. Writing a memoir is the worst. Don't ever write a memoir. It's really boring and it takes a long time, and you just get to know yourself, and then you think that you've just written this so many times, but you're obviously writing it for a new audience. This was much different because I feel like it's the process of nurturing writers. It's about really listening and reading writers. So many people, as I said, I didn't know Lucy, but I knew Jane. Many of the people in the book I don't know. I've never met them before. And there are lots that I have met before. It was about getting the right balance between the types of disability or types of impairment, types of access needs and experiences, getting an intersectional approach so that there's people from the LGBTIQA community, there are Aboriginal people, there are people who are elders, and there are young people in their teens, like Lucy. And also we've got people who are deaf as well, people whose first language might not be English. So that was a really important thing for me to do. And also the other thing that was important was we had 366 applications.
Wow.
And so the demand for people to tell their story was huge.
Yeah.
But it was very important for me to take care of the people who didn't get in the book, because when you're disabled, you experience lots of discriminatory barriers and lots of doors shut, and I didn't want this to be that. So I worked with the publisher, with Kirsty at Black Ink, to write a no letter, which was supportive and kind and encouraging, and saying, this doesn't mean you should give up on writing. We want you to submit your writing elsewhere. SBS Voices came on board and said that they're willing to look at any pictures that didn't make it into the book. And that was a really important thing. It's difficult because I still get people on Twitter reminding me that they didn't get in the book, getting a bit angry about that. They are. But I know that we did our best in providing enough support. One of the great things that happened was there was a teacher who submitted a piece, and we didn't choose their piece, but then Kirsty said, do you know of any teachers to do the teaching notes? I said, well, actually, we do. We had a great writer who is an English teacher, and that was Christy. And Christy has done the teaching notes, so she's been able to be involved in the book that way. And you met her, Christy, when we did an event.
She's good, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah.
That's great. Just before we go any further, I did want to mention to people that the paperback bookstore is selling the book tonight, and everyone is doing signings. So we'll mention that again at the end of the show. But I did want to bring that up, so you can all get your copies now. Carly, I know you have a lot of experience with writing. Jane and Lucy, have you written before? Was this your first time writing about your disability, perhaps?
Well, with Reinforce, which is an organisation for people with an intellectual disability, they did the book of Reinforce when the self-advocacy group started way back in the 1980s, and demanding the government closing these institutions all down and having us to be out in the community instead of being locked away into jails, as in those days. I call them jails, I do. But I did my story in that part of Reinforce's book, going back about, I'm 58 now, 48, probably about 47 when I was 47 or 46 then.
Yep.
And that, and this will be the second one.
Okay.
That with my story in a different book, but growing up disabled in Australia. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah.
And what about you, Lucy?
Yeah, this was my first writing experience outside of school essay. It kind of came across through a bit of a chain of events of meeting people and finding out about, growing up disabled, calling for submissions and thinking I'll give it a go, I'll write a piece. I've never done anything like this before, and it worked out pretty well for me, I think. So yeah, that's how.
Nice.
And
Lucy's working out how to skip a university class to attend an event for growing up disabled.
Nice. That's an essential part of the university experience, I got to say, definitely.
Just, rock up an hour late, drink in hand, like, sorry I'm late, I'm very important.
I'm very important, yeah. I'm published now.
And has writing about your experience changed your perception of yourself and your relationship with your own disability? Any of you?
Well, to me, with the book, for me, with me telling my story about what happened to me in institutions and sexually abuse, and the Royal Commission, when I told my story to the Royal Commission as well, and even when I was travelling around with the Royal Commission going back a few years back, it's like it hasn't actually changed me, but it's made me a lot stronger and powerful out there for people to hear, for Indigenous people and people who are not Indigenous and people who've got an intellectual disability or any disability, on what their life was like way back in the last century. And that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really
and
not long ago.
I know. And, like what things have changed now to what it was way back in those days. Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
For me, I think it hasn't necessarily changed how I see myself or my disability as such, but it's definitely given me more motivation to continue sharing my story. This is kind of, first little taste of what it's like, and I'm really enjoying it. I feel pretty empowered by it. So, it's given me a lot of motivation to hopefully do things in the future to expand on my piece in the book and my story.
Oh, it's really great. We do have our notes here.
Yeah. Sorry, we've forgotten how to have a conversation in lockdown.
Yes.
I don't know where my social skills went.
Oh, yeah. So I was curious, because the book is titled Growing Up Disabled in Australia, would you all consider yourselves to be grown up now, or is there still more growing to do?
Well, to me, I'm like every day they say you learn a different thing and you learn a new thing every day. With me, I've learned like quite a bit now since I've left, I'll say dickhead, sorry, but you know. But now, since I have left him, I've learnt a lot more about myself and about actually where I do belong in the Aboriginal culture with the Order mob. And because my dad, I know he's here now, my dad Les, I can feel him in that. And he's very happy for me to get my story across to people on what it was like in those days, and with the Aboriginals as well, when they were taken off their families and with the stolen generation and all that. So it really means a lot to me. So I've really learnt a lot more since I've been free as a bird than when I was locked up with my dickhead, sorry.
Yeah. And that's the title of your piece, Free as a Bird,
Yeah.
which I think is very appropriate. It does sound like you've been through a series of freedoms throughout your life, for lack of a better word. Like, yeah, I guess escaping.
That's right.
Situations,
So I left him at
yeah.
the age of 50 and I'm
Wow.
58 now. So you might as well say the first half of my life was rough and tough and all that. When I left him at the age of 50, my other half of my life's going to be brilliant. And I'm going to go up to Uluru and to Darwin, and I'd love to have a holiday up there with someone from who's a caseworker, you know what I'm trying to say. And I'd like to do my holiday up there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Carly, what about you? Are you all grown up?
No, no. I dress like a preschooler. No, I think we can always learn, like as Jane said, we learn new things every day, and writing has really taught me about myself, but about others, and because when you write, you hopefully read as well, which I've done a lot of, and meeting new people, and I think reading all of the submissions for the book just showed me a huge different perspectives of how people have experienced disability. Yeah. And that's, shown me my own privilege in having a very supportive family when I grew up, because many people haven't. And it's also shown me that it is okay to call myself disabled, because I am, and as I wrote in the foreword, for a long time I didn't think I was, because I didn't see anyone that was like me. And so when you don't see anyone like yourself, then how do you know that you can fit in? But I'm nearly 40, and I think, gosh, I'm nearly 40. I don't feel it. I don't look it. That's the beauty of having a skin condition that peels at the rate of 28 days in one. So that's good.
People pay a lot of money to get that done.
I know. I get a lot of questions about having microdermabrasion, but this is just me, my natural state. My mum, I wrote about this in Say Hello, but my mum is South African. She's a black woman, and her skin is very good. She looks very young. She's nearing 70, and she probably looks 50. Wow. And she said to me, I was in hospital one night, I cut my thumb, and we were in the emergency, and Mum, just waiting there for 7 hours or whatever it was, and I said to Mum, you've got to start putting some moisturiser on the bottom of your neck, you're getting a bit craggy. I can talk to Mum like that, because she talks to me like that. And she said, I've always had good skin. I said, thanks for passing it on to me, Mum. And the other patients were laughing, because we were laughing so much. So bless her genes, and mine too.
I definitely have a lot more growing up to do. I'm freshly 18, so
Congrats.
I don't think I've really started growing up a whole lot, but I definitely got a long way to go, a lot of challenges that I bet I'll face and a lot more things to learn, but I think I'm pretty ready to get past them and work my way through them and continue learning about myself and the world around me and how I can make it the best life possible that I can have. And yeah.
Nice. Yeah, Carly, it's interesting what you said about not feeling like you were growing up disabled, because it's just not something you identified with. On my hand, I didn't get diagnosed until I was 18. But when I did get diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, it felt like going through another growing up stage. Like it was almost like a second puberty. Yeah. So I sort of do say that I grew up with it, but not in the conventional sense. But yeah, and it's also been a long time for me to identify chronic illness and disability as being part of the same community. For a long time I didn't know that, and I also was hesitant and scared that I was taking up space that wasn't mine. But yeah, how do you feel about that, about chronic illness and disability coming under the same banner?
Yeah, I shared a tweet yesterday on my Instagram about this, that if you are mentally ill or chronically ill, you belong in the disability community, even if you don't call yourself disabled. That tweet was from someone called Joanna Banana.
Yep.
Joanna Banana. I think she's just made it up, but it might be. I don't know. I'll ask. And yeah, I think for me the step to identifying as disabled was identifying as chronically ill, because I used to mentor at the Children's Hospital, the Royal Children's Hospital, the Chronic Illness Peer Support Program, CHIPS, and it was then that I met a whole heap of people that had different impairments to me, different illnesses, and we all experienced the same thing, even though we had such different lives. And so things like lots of time off school and work, discrimination at school and work, lots of doctors in a specialist setting, and lots of time in hospital, having friends that didn't really understand it, or not having friends at all. And so when I mentored those young people, they were between 12 and 26, I was 26 myself, and I felt like I benefited from that just as much as they did, because I was learning about that. And then after, just as I started mentoring, I started writing about life with ichthyosis more, and working in the media, volunteering in the media firstly, and then writing for the media. And then that led me to learn around disability and the social model of disability, where society's more disabling than our bodies.
Yep. Can you speak a bit more on the social model? Because I know you bring it up in your introduction to the book, and we have mentioned it a few times on Pill Pop, but haven't really gone into it in depth. So what is the social model, and why do you agree with that? So
the social model of disability means that society is more disabling than our bodies. So there are a number of models of disability. So the medical model means that doctors, parents perhaps, education setting, sees our bodies as a deficit, as something to be fixed. The charity model of disability sees people who are disabled as objects of pity and just waiting around for charity, begging on the street, or being poster children to raise money for a non-disability-led organisation. Also, I guess that one thing that comes into that is the idea that we will work for free, which is just a never-ending story in my life. I got a lovely invite yesterday that circumvented my speaking agent. We know you've got a speaking agent, but we'll ask you directly if you want to work for free. And then the social model of disability, there are some other models as well, but the social model of disability sees that society being the disabling barrier, so things like physical barriers, a lack of a ramp, a lack of an Auslan interpreter, attitudinal barriers like unconscious bias or conscious bias, and low expectations, and overt discrimination that are more disabling. I did a really great event yesterday through Fair Play, run by Diversity Arts Australia, and Caroline Bowditch ran it, and she said that in different countries or even settings within Australia, she can be more or less disabled. So an example of that, I guess, as it applies to me, when I go overseas, there's a lot more preparation that I have to do than if I was just getting around here, because I have to talk to the airline about getting extra leg room and being able to take extra luggage, and then having, experiencing greater pain because it's the different water and the different climate. So does that explain it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
And it ties in quite neatly with a question we've had from a listener. We're not doing live audience questions, but we've had some sent in. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so this is going to be, you're going to get a lot of me leaning away from the microphone to cough, which is a lot of what our recorded interviews are as well. So this is a question from Adam, who lives with a lot of physical differences related to visual impairment and epilepsy that are referred to as disabilities. They are, he says, they are the focus of what it is assumed I cannot do. How can we change the language that defines physical, intellectual, and psychological difference from the language that empowers people who live with these differences? To language that empowers people who live with these differences. And recognise the abilities and strength that they have had to develop and thrive, to live and thrive in a world that is not designed for them. Sorry.
This is the guy that said he was re-abled, right?
Yeah, defined himself as re-abled.
Yeah.
So
that's, I guess we can have a general discussion about language, ableist language, and the language we use to describe the different sectors of the disability community. I mean, how do you all identify yourselves, and have you had to think much about it?
Do you mean with intellectual disabilities?
Yeah.
And well, I'll let someone else go, and then I can work out what they're saying.
So
You know what I mean?
Do you want to go? Or do you want me to?
You can go.
Okay, I have a lot to say on language.
Yep.
At the event that I went to yesterday, Caroline Bowditch referenced Fiona Toomey, who is an incredible filmmaker and writing mentor in Melbourne. And Fiona has said that the opposite of disability isn't inability, it is accessibility, which I hadn't heard before, and I thought that was an amazing thing that Fiona had said, so props to Fiona. I think it's great that disabled people can call ourselves, term ourselves however we want, and if Adam has called himself re-abled, that's, his choice. You may have seen on April 1st, I did a very fun Instagram post, which I got the permission from the publisher to do. I remember talking about this to Jacinta, my agent, who was like, "Oh no, people won't get that. Their sense of humour is just gone." Anyway, so every time I do an event with a non-disabled person or a disabled person, remember we got this question in Geelong. Someone in the audience is like, "Why have you put disabled in the title? It's not going to sell any books. It's an offensive term." And so the book has gone to reprint after 2 weeks, so there's that. So it is selling books, and it's not an offensive term. So I got the permission from Black Ink to create some funny covers for April Fool's Day, which is an ableist term, so April Fun Day. And so we had growing up special needs in Australia, growing up differently abled in Australia, growing up I don't even see your disability in Australia, and growing up you can't say that word in Australia. And so the publisher's partner, Jen, is a graphic designer, so she redid these, and it got a very good response. But then so it was interesting. There were two things that happened. One, three things. People got it, they were like, "Oh, this is hilarious." Two, service providers, disability service providers, who generally have non-disabled people working for them, were like, "Oh, congratulations on the new book." And three, disabled people were like, oh, how dare Black Ink take over this and insert themselves in. So that was pretty funny. I don't know if the sales increased, but it certainly got people talking. And
got
it
attention,
was pretty funny that day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
People were really into it, and it was the best April Fool's joke I've ever done, I've ever seen. In the history of April Fun Day, it was the best. And it was really, I think the thing that showed me is, that it showed was that people trust an organisation. Like, so they had the trust in Black Ink to work with us as allies. And then they were, if they didn't understand it, they were like, oh, but Black Ink's, stepped over us now, and look at this offensiveness. And it was really about taking back that power and showing people that it is okay to say the word. Yep. But I did put in the post, I actually never corrected it and said this was an April Fun Day joke. I just said, thanks for playing along. But I had said something like, it's so important we listen to those non-disabled people and centre them in this argument.
I think it's pretty evident there, the sarcasm. At least
people took it very literal.
There's always going to be one or two, yeah. How about you, Lucy? Do you first and foremostly identify as disabled? And has that language been really important to you?
Yeah, I personally do identify as disabled. I consider myself as having a disability, and I'm pretty accepting of that and acknowledge that. But I also do know that there are many people that don't like using that term for themselves. And I think one thing with using language around disability or chronic illness should be just people not being afraid to ask someone rather than make assumptions. I know that personally I would rather somebody say, hey, do you actually identify as, having a disability? And I say, yeah, I don't find it offensive in regards to myself at all, but some people do. So I think it's always just best to ask rather than assuming things, rather than assuming it's an offensive term or it's an okay term to use. And my personal experience has been a bit of a, not so much debate, but a discussion of whether to call someone with albinism a person with albinism or an albino, which is a pretty commonly used term by people that don't know much about albinism. I personally don't really mind. I don't find either offensive, but I know that if I was speaking to someone else with albinism, I would either ask them or I would probably use a person with albinism. A lot of people say, I'm not an albino, I'm a human. I live with albinism, but I'm not an albino. That's not what I am. So I definitely think that it's just something you have to ask people, and I think people would much prefer to tell you what they like than have you assume what they like.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the important thing to keep in mind is that changing language is, the point of it is that it's part of a much broader set of changes to society to make a world that is more just and more accessible and just more about meeting people where they're at and listening to what they need.
Yeah, it's not superficial at all. It's very important, should we talk a bit more about the pieces that Jane and Lucy have written?
So
maybe the Lucy one.
So Lucy, you write a lot. You wrote in your piece, This Is My Song, about using humour to explain albinism and your eye condition. So do you think that humour, it is the best tool or just one of many for conquering ableism?
I don't think it's maybe the best, but it's definitely one tool. It's something that I find very helpful to use. I think, I'm able to laugh at myself and laugh with other people, but it's important that people are aware that I'm the one that makes those boundaries, and that sometimes people try and use humour and it doesn't come across that way because they don't understand. So I think it all depends on the person and what they are comfortable with, and their personal boundaries and limits. I know that mine are probably a lot broader than maybe other people with vision impairment or albinism, because I'm pretty, that's the way it is. That's the way it's going to be forever. So why not, just live with it? But yet again, it all depends on the person. But I personally do love using humour.
Yeah, it really comes through. It's such a joyous piece, even when you're talking about losing your teeth while bike riding. It's still laugh out loud funny. So. And it's part of your unique voice. So keep using the humour.
There really is such a striking difference when there's. You hear a lot of jokes about different chronic conditions that come from people who aren't living with them versus people who are. Yeah. You can really feel that difference.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
People get very cagey and walking on eggshells when they're trying to talk about it. But talking to other people who have chronic illness and disability, it's a free for all. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yes. So there was a part where you talk about thanking your parents for letting you know from a very young age that you would be perceived as different.
Yep.
You said that's an important lesson to learn. Why was that important to learn at that age?
I think it was important because it gave me that extra time to accept it. And I think that if it was kind of this bombshell that was, thrown on me at 10 or 11 years old, I don't think I would have taken it as well. I've known ever since I could understand what albinism was or what me not being able to see as well as everyone else, I think learning that as soon as I could made it more normalised for me to grow up with it and gave me that opportunity to accept it and just know that I had to live with it. So it's the way I've always been. So I didn't see a reason why my parents would hide it from me till a certain age. So I think it was, I'm really appreciative that they normalised it so much when I was young that I've been able to grow up, and I think that plays a huge part in the way that I see myself now. I'm still very, very young, but I think I've had 18 years to come to terms with it. So I'm really appreciative of my parents for taking it on that way.
My parents did the same, and I see parents who don't tell their child that they're disabled because they think that it's a negative term or it's a negative thing, but they might not be able to advocate, right, if they don't have the language to do that. And I definitely feel a affinity with what you said, Lucy, in that it's so important for parents to say that this is how it is. Like mine are very matter of fact.
Yeah.
This is how it's going to be. Like I knew how
this
to.
Is it.
Yeah, I knew how to say it when I was 3. Say ichthyosis when I was 3 and spell it when I was a bit older than that. But it's just important to know that. And
I think
not to deny it.
Yeah, I think as well, especially in kind of going through school, it really helped me to, if people said, why do you do this? Or why do you look like this? I was able from a really young age to explain that to other people. And that was really important for myself. If someone ever asked, I couldn't imagine me going, well, I don't know. I don't think I see any differently to you because I've never seen any different, so I wouldn't know. If I wasn't told, I wouldn't know. So I think having an answer to those questions that I was asked from a young age and knowing why I was struggling at school and knowing people that could help me get through it because I was so aware of myself and my vision really, really helped me get through primary and high school and self-advocate.
That does seem to be a common thread amongst you, the realisation that you would be perceived as different. Jane, when did that come about for you?
Do you mean me with the disability?
Yeah, when did you first realise that people looked at you differently?
Oh, do you mean looked at me differently and not accepted me? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I was taken away at the age of 6 months old. I was. So I was put into institutions from that age. And when I went to the institution, I thought that was my family. And I thought the nurses were my mum and dad until I turned 8 years old. And that's when I can remember the nurses said that we've got information for you, Jane. Your mum's dead, do you know that? And then after that, like, I didn't know, like, from half 8, but I was crying and all this, and I wouldn't eat my tea that night, I remember. So I had to be taken in the toddler's ward, and the nurse just said, "Shut up, Jane, eat your tea and stop talking about it," like that. And then after that, it would have been about my teens that I wanted to find out who my family was, because I knew that I was saying, why was I in the institution in the first place? And it was because I had epileptic fits, which I've had a brain surgery, and because of our family that couldn't keep us fed and all that in those days. And that's when I started finding out that I wanted to find out who my family was, because I can remember the social worker that was at Pleasant Creek in those days, that person used to say, right, the person who's on your birth certificate is your actual father. And that's when I used to think if it was true in those days, until I had a DNA with the person's son that proved that he was not my father. Wow. But he's still on there, on my birth certificate still today.
That's fascinating.
He is, and he's not my dad.
Wow.
And my dad, I'm Aboriginal, so Les is my dad.
Yep.
And, you know, so in those days, things were hidden in those days.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of abuse and abuse, trauma, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
All that was going behind closed doors, under the mat, because the government thought that we were being looked after properly, which we weren't. Yes.
It's shocking. It's you've had such a tumultuous life already, and I have to say your chapter was, I think, one of the most heartbreaking. But it is wonderful to see you on the other side of it as well, advocating for people like yourself.
That's right, and even for the Indigenous people as well, and even for the First Peoples Disability Network, which is an organisation in Sydney, which I'm a member of, because it really means a lot to me. It really does, I
think the line that really broke my heart in your piece was the description of you hugging the lamb's wool on the farm, because that was your hug. You didn't get many hugs. That was,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that being just, a tearjerker.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah. And then in 2009, you won a Human Rights Award, is that right?
Yeah.
That was the, was it the Tony Fitzgerald Award? Is that the one that you're talking about, for the whole of Australia? Yes, that was the one when I went around with the Royal Commission telling my story about this sexual abuse, and try and get other people to tell their stories and to come forward, because they will be believed now to what it was in my days, when you weren't even allowed to speak and talk about it, because you weren't being believed. But I was going around with the Royal Commission, and I had a few panic attacks, I can remember, because when I was talking about my story, I was picturing, and it was taking me back in the jail with those 4 men that sexually abused me in the institution. But the Royal Commission, there was quite a few people that came forward and told their stories, which was good, and even for the Indigenous as well, when I went up to Alice Springs and told my story up there as well. Yes.
Yeah. Must have been cathartic.
Say that word again.
Cathartic?
What does that word mean?
Healing, in a way.
Healing,
Like
that's better.
Yeah, you know, like
you're
like when you
releasing
cry
stuff.
after a long time, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, when I went up to Alice Springs, I really felt like if I was wanted. I really felt comfortable. My dad was really there.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've just noticed your tattoo as well. That says "Free as a Bird," which is the same name as your piece.
Well, this one I got after I left my partner, and it stands for with the angel with the wings on "Free as a Bird," because I see that you only live once on this earth. You're under the ground a lot longer than what you are alive. So that's why I left him at the age of 50. And I'm just so happy about it.
Nice.
Yes.
That's awesome. Do we have more questions for Jane?
We have some questions that have been sent in.
Yep.
I have some questions from your friend Beck. Has
yes.
there ever been an awkward time to bring up your illness? I think for me it always comes up at work because I forget to tell people, and then I bust out my insulin pen and start injecting myself. And people freak out when they see a needle. So I always have to be like, no, it's fine. This is good. This is a good thing.
So I'll open that up to everyone else. Is it, I guess, is it always awkward to have to bring up your disability or your illness? Have there been particular times where it's been worse than others?
Well,
you go, Jane. No.
Okay. Well, for me, it's it's easier for me now to bring up about my intellectual disability than about when I used to have epileptic fits, because I can even remember one of the social worker that was at Pleasant Creek, when I kept hounding her about who my dad was and who my mum was and all this. She even said to me, "You shouldn't have even belonged there in the first place, in the institution." And that's when that was good for her to say that. That was because, if we weren't put into institutions, we would have been, I reckon I would have been different. But in one way it was good, but in another way it was bad, because it used to be 16 years old and the government flicked it up to 21. But I've become to be a lot stronger now to when I was living with him. Because I can remember the very, very, very first book, the very first book that I told my story was when I was still having the epileptic fits, and it was to do with bungee jumping, noise and love. And that's when I was repeating myself, I do, I will, I have at the end of it, have at the end of the sentences, which I don't now since I've had the brain surgery. Yeah.
And Carly.
I feel like having a very visible difference, a facial difference, skin condition, means that I disclose my disability just by being, and so it's hard because you've got no choice in how people perceive you when you walk into the room. When I was younger, I would probably not feel comfortable to apply ointment. Sorry, I have a cold. Not COVID, I have a test. I've been tested. It's fine. But I would feel like I couldn't put my ointment on in front of people now. Like it's on stage, this is being recorded. I'm not ashamed of that. Like, I think that disclosure or a lack of disclosure comes with shame, and it takes a long time to shake that shame. There's sometimes I have to, have just sort of quiet words to people around access needs. Like, I'm very open about them, but say like it might mean that someone's invited me to their house and I'll have to say, do you have a cat? And then that becomes awkward because I'm allergic to cats, and then not being able to go in that way. But generally, I feel like having written publicly for so long, it's easy now, much easier now to disclose that stuff. And I was due to have a COVID vaccination last week, and when I rang to book in, they said I have to get a letter from my doctor because it's not my doctor that will do it. And the admin, like the amount of admin for COVID has been ridiculous, just with getting a doctor's certificate for not wearing a mask or having a cleaner and some other things. But I almost said to them, can't you just Google me? Like, I just don't want to have another doctor's appointment for this, all this information's out there,
Just rock up with your memoir, like, here's my doctor's note.
Although there has been that, though. It's interesting because I think that the book, my memoir, and this book as well, is a very good resource for doctors, but I almost don't feel like repeating myself anymore. And I went to the pain specialist, which I only see once a year, and it was on a day that I had to do some media for Say Hello, and I had the book with me because I'd just done ABC News Breakfast and some other stuff as well. And the woman, because it's a teaching hospital, the doctors continually change, and the teacher, the doctor, she said to me, "Oh, so tell me about your pain. And I'm like, well, actually, there's a whole chapter in chapter 6 called the really shit stuff. And then she's like trying to flick through it. I'm like, oh no, you must buy it. Us writers, we just can't afford to give away our book. So it's hard because I think you can disclose on your own terms, but then for some of us you can't.
Yeah, you're so right. And I've just talking about, can't you just Google it? I've been tempted to just say to doctors and therapists, can you just listen to the podcast? Because it's like all my physical, mental illness and my trauma, it's all in there. So.
Yeah.
What about you, Lucy?
I think for me, it's I have obviously a physical difference in the way, my hair colour and my skin. So I think in that way, half of my disability is immediately disclosed to people, but a lot of people that I meet I assume that they know that I have albinism, which is probably not the best of me to assume, but a lot of the time I'm correct and they do know. But it's a bit awkward to bring up the vision side of it because it's not something that people see all the time. I'm a bit naughty and I don't use my cane probably as much as I should be, but yeah, it's a bit kind of weird to bring it up. I'm not ashamed of it or anything. It's just, I met a bunch of people from uni a couple of weeks ago. I just started there maybe a month or two ago, and I was, on the train going to meet these new people that I never met before, and I was thinking, I mean, I don't care that they know if I'm blind, but how do I bring it up with them? I'm going to have my cane and they're going to see me, but how do I make sure that they know? Do I just, I don't want to make a big announcement. Do I just not say anything and wait for them to come to me, but will they be too scared to? So I think meeting new people for me is a bit of a, maybe not nerve-wracking, but it's kind of like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to play this out until I get to that comfortable point of people knowing? As I know that, and this is no, shade to my school, but when I was in year 7, they said, stand up in front of the rest of the kids in year 7 on the first week and tell them about yourself and what you have. And I mean, I was happy to do that, but it was very short notice. And I was like, how do I describe it to these kids that I don't know in this new environment that I'm unfamiliar with? And I am glad I did that because thankfully everyone from that moment on was aware, and I never really had to, go through that again for the next 6 years. But yeah, starting uni's definitely made me have to think about, new teachers, how do I explain to them what I need and things like that. But I'm learning, as I meet new people every day, I'm learning more and more how to present myself. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It is always hard to find understanding, especially when you're growing up. I know you have a lot of experiences there.
Every teacher at my school knew me as the one with diabetes because there was a picture of me in every staff room of this kid has diabetes. And there were a couple of other kids, but for some reason the picture they had was the same one since I was 7 years old. So it's like, how's that helpful? But yeah, I was constantly explaining to teachers, no, sometimes I have to leave the room to drink juice. I promise it's an emergency. I know, I just left and now I'm eating jelly beans. Real medical emergency, I'm serious here.
It's got sugar in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think teachers were really scrutinising,
Yeah. And then you go through all that, and then you start high school, and then you start uni, and it's like starting all over again, right? Having to re-explain, and then work as well.
Yeah.
So, have any of you come up against any interesting barriers with work?
Are you talking about do you mean work from the past?
Yeah, any work from the
Oh,
past.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
how have you dealt with those barriers to your disability?
Well, my very first job was Lydia's, which is in Stall. And I can remember when I was when I was at school that I used to do 2 hours dusting, vacuuming, sweeping, mopping, and I can remember when we used to just get $20 for those 2 hours.
Wow.
Which, in those days we thought it was a lot. Of because we're from an institution, but it wasn't. It was like slave labour.
Labour, yeah.
Yes. And like in those days, we were just being seen as, oh, that person's retarded, that person's spastic, oh, she's from an institution and all that. And I can remember when I was at the Stall Hospital, when I was working full-time there, that the staff used to make me stay back and work a lot longer hours than what I should have been. Because of my disability and because I was brought up in an institution. And I can remember that I used to be picked on a lot there because I didn't have anyone to go to, and I can remember with the union that I wasn't to know your rights then, that you could tell the union what was going on when you were at the hospital, because I was getting picked on too many times, and I used to always be blamed for things, and I had to go up to the office, and I was up there for about 5 times, and I used to always get told off by the big boss because I was always to blame for things that went on wrong in the hospital from the domestic cleaners. Yes.
Yep.
And that's when I didn't know about my rights and all that then.
Yeah. Are things better now?
Oh, God, yes.
Yep.
Free as a bird now.
Great.
Yes.
How about you, Carly?
Yeah, I went to work at Kmart when I was 17, and that was halfway through year 12, and that was the best thing that happened to me as a teenager, because I had to work in a somewhat professional environment, and I made so many friends that I didn't have at school. I was, constantly going out with them when I turned 18 and had these real friendships that I didn't have before. But the most important thing was learning how to deal with ridiculous questions about my face in a professional way. And I worked with my manager to be able to pass someone on if I didn't want to serve them. If I could say, you've been really rude, I'm just going to pass you to my colleague.
Wow.
I used to work in the sound and vision area. That was like the epitome, like you've made it at Kmart. So I used to choose the music when I was 20, 21. And I remember there was a customer that came in and really rude and condescending, like, oh, it's so great to see someone like you out on the floor, not locked up somewhere. And it was at the time when you do the photos, the copies of the photos. So someone would bring a photo in and you'd copy it on a fancy machine. Yep. And I would do that, and I ended up like cutting off their heads and then just it was a long time ago. I can't be sacked for that now. I don't work at Kmart anymore. But I gave them the photos because, they essentially said I should be erased from the store, so I erased them from the photos.
That's amazing. Izzie, have you had much experience in the work environment?
I haven't. The most I've probably done is my work experience, which is a really good experience overall. I didn't have any issues with that. But I think the work environment has always scared me maybe a little bit. People always say, oh, you could get a part-time job. It's like, I know I could, and if I really worked hard, I could, but I think I still worry a little bit about, what lengths is an employer willing to go for a teenager who's legally blind when they can get the next teenager to do the same thing without having to make any adjustments. And I think that's not something, I don't want that to hold anyone back from wanting to go for a part-time job, but that's something that I've thought about, and even people saying, you could work, as a waitress or something. It's like, but I won't be able to see the table numbers. I won't be able to know where to go when people are sitting. I won't be able to navigate through the tables and the chairs and everyone moving around. And it's the simple things like that made me kind of a bit apprehensive maybe to get myself out there in the work environment. But,
it comes back to that social model.
Definitely.
That's a perfect example.
I think one of the things that has been really important to me,
That's right.
for the book was to give people opportunities. So the authors, the contributors were paid, but then there was events like this where I think we're being paid. That's okay if we're not, but there have been paid events as well where where you might not be able to work in a traditional environment like a cafe, but you can come out and speak or you can write, and that was very important that we can equip the contributors with the skills to go out and do these things.
That's great.
About using your strengths as well. My strengths is definitely not seeing. So, a part-time job that a lot of them are very visual, working at a counter, having to see the machine and things like that. So, it's all about using your strengths. I'm pretty good at talking, especially about myself. So I think this is a pretty good little side gig that I've got going on now.
Wonderful.
And the one thing with that book, what we've got our stories in,
Yep.
that can stay forever and ever and ever.
Yes.
That's how I see it. Money, it disappears. You've gone. It's gone. But the book on black and white paper, it can stay forever and generations to generations on people with a disability, on what it was like in those days.
Absolutely. And with that, I think that's a perfect spot to wrap it up. We are out of time, unfortunately. It's been great. It's really nice to meet all of you and talk to you all, Jane, Carly and Lucy. And yes, once again, they will be signing the books and you can buy them just at the back there. So please do. And thank you all for coming. And thanks to our Auslan interpreters and the Wheeler Centre.
Yes. And thank you to the State of Victoria for keeping case numbers so low that we could do this.
Yes.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and around the world.